start with this. How shocked? Adam Schefter was on the McAfee show, and he said that there was going to be any coaching changes. And a lot of people locally have been told don't expect a coaching change. And then Brian Callahan got fired. What do you make of it?
Well, I think the best thing, the easiest way to look at this is before the season. I think there were some questions about the direction of everything, of course, again, and for the fourth straight year that was in question. And I think after they got a few games in, there was this feeling, okay, it's probably a fait accompli, that we are going to be making a coaching change at the end of the year. However, there probably isn't great benefit in getting rid of Brian Callahan right now. It's not toxic yet, right? And so it's not like this is a bad environment. The players don't dislike Brian Callahan. If we do blow him out, we'll probably lose his dad, who's one of the most respected line coaches in the sport. Plus, we'll stretch our staff thin and put our young quarterback in an environment with an interim coach that maybe you don't want a young quarterback in. And so, I think that was sort of the prevailing feeling the last few weeks. And then everything did a 180 on Monday morning. And, I can just tell you, from the coach's standpoint, they generally have this meeting. It's normally at 11 a.m. It was at noon this week because they're traveling back from Vegas. And that's when the position coaches, give their review of their guys and the coordinators speak. That meeting, on Monday morning, was abruptly canceled. Then rescheduled for 12:30, which is where Callie wound up telling his staff that he'd been let go. I think this is a lot like the Mike Vrabel situation. It's Amy acting alone, and one thing that's common with every one of these moves, and I'm sure you've heard this, Jared, is Amy doesn't like being embarrassed, right? And she had a huge family contingent at that game in Vegas. And, I think just maybe some of the, you can go back over the years and look at them, right? You and I don't I know you don't think it's any coincidence that she gets that she fires John Robinson. What is it? 2 days after after they play against AJ Brown, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that she needs her pound of flesh after they have the worst record in the league. It's just all of these different moves seem to depend on her own personal emotions, and B, whoever the last person she listened to is. And so I think that's sort of where you were at on Monday morning, that, there was that feeling of embarrassment and, the potential that embarrassment could get worse 6 days later with Mike Vrabel coming to town, which I think influenced the move.
Bert, why does she love Chad Brinker as much as she does? I know Chad Brinker was at the Green Bay Packers, but he's been a part of all the big decisions they've made, including firing Vrabel, hiring Callahan, keeping Callahan, hiring Mike Borgonzi, and they've gotten worse and worse since Chad Brinker's here. And yet, even yesterday, he said, I speak for her. Why does she love him so much?
Well, I think because Chad's doing a lot of stuff that fans don't see that the organization really did need, Now, if it's me, you want to rewind the clock 3 years, I'm finding a way to make it work with John Robinson and Mike Vrabel, right? Because I don't think that thing was broken. They hadn't drafted well for a couple of years, but you could do a lot worse than those two. And if you're bottoming out, which the bottoming out under them was 7-10 and 6-11 after, a run with Ryan Tannehill where you make the playoffs 3 times in 4 years. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, I think the way I would look at that one, I just think there's that. And if you want to take that versus where they are now, yes, you rewind the clock and I think you make that work. But the way they were doing things back then, I think there was a lot of things within the organization that needed modernizing. The way the place was structured was kind of old school, and a lot of the methods were old school. And I think one thing that's sort of interesting about owners now that a lot of people miss, a lot of these owners, there's a reason why they're a lot of them are hung up on analytics or fascinated with analytics, is because it makes football more accessible to them. In other words, guys who are lifers like Vrabel and John Robinson are speaking a language that owners don't know, whereas like you bring in somebody who has the analytical background or went to business school, and they're able to kind of reach the owner on their own level. And I think Chad has the combination of both that makes Amy really comfortable.
If you were to look at the Titans coaching position, they said yesterday it was a desirable job. I think all these jobs are desirable, the salaries, the positions, everything. Do people across the league know who's actually hiring the coach? Like, do they know, like, hey, Chad Brinker's hiring the coach, Mike Borgonzi's hiring the coach, Amy Adams Strunk is hiring the coach? Is there a sense that the Titans have a direction led by one person that would decide who the next coach is going to be?
I'd say the answer to that is not yet. And that doesn't, you don't need to have an answer to it right now, Jared. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be another 3 months until they can even, bring anybody in and talk to them, so they don't need to have that answer yet, but I do know that when the time comes, they're going to need to have like real answers to those sorts of questions, because that's what guys are going to be coming in and asking. And I think the interesting piece of it, and this to me is going to dictate, how attractive this job is how well Cam Ward plays the rest of the year. Because, you just kind of like look at where they're at. I would guess, right? Like that Cam Ward is not going anywhere in 26. He's not going anywhere in 27. So everybody has their own perception of what Cam Ward is right now. And if that perception is affected either positively or negatively by the way he plays, then that's going to materially affect how attractive the Titans job is. Because if you're a prospective coach, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, I at least probably, my guess is I'm at least going to have to ride out 2 years with this guy. And based on the organization's recent history, like who the hell is going to believe they're getting more than 2 years? You know what I mean? Like, so like you almost have to believe in Cam Ward for it to be an attractive job, because I just don't know how you can count on having another shot at quarterback if you come to Tennessee and sign up for that job based on the timeline of the guys who were there before.
Bert, I think a lot of people were surprised when Vrabel got fired just because everybody thought Vrabel was such a good coach. I don't think that anybody looks at the record Brian Callahan had and thought that wasn't deserving of a firing. But I do wonder, were people around the league still a little surprised given that it had been a year and a half and it hadn't been 2 years, 3 year of him as a head coach? What was kind of the reaction across the league when the Titans made this choice?
I mean, he was really well respected before he got the job. So that's one thing that I think you need to take into account. But based on where things were and based on how things have gone over the last few years in that organization and based on how the team looked, I don't think anybody was blown away, because I think Amy's now got a reputation of being an unpredictable owner capable of these sorts of things, it's just, you can put it in a bucket with teams like the Raiders, where like strange things just seem to happen. And, it takes time to get yourself out of that category. But with the way that they've handled everything since Vrabel and Robinson walked out the door, they've earned that label, and so when things like this happen, I don't think it shocks anybody. In fact, like in a lot of cases, when someone gets fired from a place like that, most people think like, okay, like, well, maybe he'd be better somewhere else because that place is just what it is, So it's going to be interesting to see the way this goes. And, I think one thing I'm going to be keeping an eye on is like, do they just go completely go in a completely different direction than, than we saw with Brian Callahan? Because one thing that was pointed out to me was how Rand Carthon was the polar opposite of John Robinson, and Mike and Brian Callahan was the polar opposite of Mike Vrabel, right? And so, like, that's the way bad organizations operate. Is like you make a mistake on one person, then you go all the way in the other direction, and you do that enough times, and you have no organizational identity anymore. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing the Titans have lost over the course of the last few years. Is, for better or worse, like when J-Rob and Vrabel were there, you knew exactly what they were. You knew what they were trying to build. You knew the type of players they were looking for. You know what the strengths of the team were going to be. You knew what the Titans were. Can anybody say what the Titans are right now?
They're a dumpster fire, but yeah.
But you know what I'm saying.
No, and you're right, because I wrote my list. I was kind of talking about who the Titans' next coach might be, and I was doing this like a game of guess who. So I'm like, they're not going to hire any coach that would demand full authority, because Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi aren't giving that up. They're not going to pay a coach. People are talking about Dan Lanning. They're not going to pay a coach $10 million. So every college guy is out, because they all make more than what the Titans are going to spend. And one of the ones I wrote down on the list was, I wrote, the Titans are a very reactive group. They try to hire the opposite of what they just had. Vrabel and Robinson bickered, so they hired Rand Carthon to get along with Vrabel. And then they hired Brian Callahan, who's the opposite of Vrabel. So now they're probably going to hire the opposite of Callahan, which makes me think, Bert, they are going to hire a former head coach. And I heard your former colleague Ian Rappaport put out there yesterday, Matt Nagy, Arthur Smith. I think the most important thing, I am preferential to Arthur Smith because I like Arthur Smith, but also people will say, well, Amy knows Arthur. I think it's more important that Arthur knows Amy. Because he would be knowing what he's getting himself into. And all I want to know about Arthur, he's done a good job in Pittsburgh. He did a good job here. Mm-hmm. What the hell happened in Atlanta with Desmond Ridder? Why did it suck so bad? And is Arthur going to be a name that people take seriously going forward?
Well, let me start with just what you said about him knowing Amy. I think that's super important, right? Like, I think one thing that people don't understand about these jobs is that you have to manage up, right? You have to manage your owner. And I always thought, like, I always remember, when Jason Garrett got the Dallas job, how good he was at managing Jerry Jones. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's one of the reasons why he lasted for as long as he did. And like, they were never really a mess under Jason Garrett. You know what I mean? Like, he was able to really stabilize that place because he knew how to manage up, and he knew the dynamics of the organization because he was a player there. And so his history with that family went so far back. And I think you can say the same thing about Arthur Smith. And it's not just Amy, it's knowing the entire family. It's knowing all the dynamics with people like Kenneth, like it's understanding the way the organization works. And if you have like that sort of background in understanding the way things work, it gives you a chance to succeed, because you're going to be caught off guard by fewer things, And so where, like Brian Callahan could come in and be like, okay, like that interview went well, like I got to meet everybody. Well, you know as well as I do, that's all happy horse bleep, right? Like when things go wrong is when you find out who people really are. And so if you have the background and knowing who they are, that's really going to help. As for what happened in Atlanta, I think the biggest thing to me, they did a good job of building up the roster. And if you watch them last night, like you see a lot of the guys that Arthur brought in and playing pivotal roles there, right? I would say the biggest problem was that first year they hung on to Matt Ryan, right? And they were trying to win in that first year. And then it was like, okay, we're going to reset. And then they passed on quarterbacks in 2 years. When you look at it and you see those weren't very good years to be drafting quarterbacks, right?
Yep.
So like he was actually right. In 2022, they didn't draft a quarterback. That was the Kenny Pickett year. In 23, they didn't draft a quarterback. Well, they had no access to Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. And then what are they going to do? Trade up for Anthony Richardson? That wouldn't have worked either. And he was given like the green light by the organization. And this is, I don't know how much has been out there, but he was given the green light by the organization. Hey, like we sign off on you being patient at quarterback. And then it wound up being what cost him his job, And so he was trying to be patient and build up the roster. And the whole plan was, we're going to be a fully formed team. We're going to tread water at quarterback and be a fully formed team when we put the young quarterback in. And unfortunately, he wound up running out of time because, again, it was one of these situations where the owner got a little bit impatient and didn't like some of the things that were coming back to him. And, X leads to Y, leads to Z, and now all of a sudden the conditions under which you were building, which were, you don't need to sell out for a quarterback right now, came back to bite him.
If Matt Nagy is out there, which we know that as a former coach in Chicago, I think Matt Nagy doesn't get enough credit for what he did in Chicago, making the playoffs twice with Trubisky. If Mike Borgonzi's making this hire, I feel like it's pretty simple to say it will be Matt Nagy. Would you be surprised, or is Matt Nagy going to have better job offers and better situations to choose from?
Well, let's just remember too, like that, both those guys have head coaching experience. I think that's going to be important here. Because you talk about going the other way. I don't know if the Titans can afford another first timer, right? And both Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy have hands-on experience with quarterbacks, which I think really helps, right? And Nagy was a part of, developing Mahomes when he was a rookie and made his mistakes, in Chicago. But if you look again, like you said, in Chicago, at what he accomplished over the course of his time there, they never really bottomed out until the very end. They won 12 games. And then you take a look at like what John Fox did before he got there, what Matt Eberflus did after he left, what Mark Trestman did before Fox. All of a sudden, like the context of it is like, maybe it wasn't him. You know what I mean? Like maybe he wasn't the problem. And so I think Matt learned a lot. I know he's been introspective about trying to learn and look in the mirror about what went wrong in Chicago. And he's obviously got that similar background with Borgonzi, where the minute he walks in the door, Borgonzi's going to know what he's looking for in players at every single position, so like there's no guessing or projecting there. And I feel like that was part of the problem with Callie is there was a lot of projecting, right? Like we knew his experience with quarterbacks. If you meet Callie, I mean, I'd be surprised if somebody met Callie 2 years ago and didn't say, yeah, this guy can be a head coach, right? Everybody would have thought it, but you were projecting, right? You were projecting as a leader. You were projecting as a play caller. And the production didn't match the projection there. With these guys who have experience, you're projecting less and even less so with somebody like Nagy, who, Borgonzi obviously has working experience with.
Is there any name on the coordinator circuit that you would say, hey, keep an eye on? A lot of Titan fans are excited about Joe Brady, as a potential candidate here. Jesse Minter has been talked about, but it doesn't feel like there's a Ben Johnson right now that has established themselves as a coordinator who's going to be a hot ticket. Where are we on the coordinator?
So I don't know if you can take a swing on a Joe Brady, and I really like Joe, and it's nothing against him, but I don't know if you take a swing on a Joe Brady. I think and again, maybe this is a correction, but I think you do think about going back down that former player route, right? Like, cause you think about the people in the locker room and what resonated with them. And if you feel like you've got guys in that locker room that are going to be a part of it for the next few years that were responding to Vrabel that maybe that didn't respond to Callie the same way, and you're thinking about the former player route, I got an interesting name for you that's a little off the radar right now. And that's the quarterback's coach in Denver, that Davis Webb, who is extremely well thought of, who's a great quarterbacks guy, who I think if you get around him, you'll see he's kind of got the swagger and the presence of an ex-player. And I think he's somebody who could come in and galvanize a place pretty quickly. So Davis Webb would be one that I would keep an eye on. And along those lines, if we're looking at a former quarterback and all of that stuff, Cliff Kingsbury's another one, where he has head coaching experience, extensive head coaching experience, both at college and pro, and, has done a good job in developing Jaden Daniels in Washington. So I think Davis Webb and Cliff Kingsbury would be two names I would kind of keep an eye on, because I think they check a bunch of boxes when you're talking about developing Cam Ward and bringing in somebody who's got some presence and somebody who might resonate with the players a little bit because, they are ex-players.
Two stupid things to ask you about. One is the fans here. I don't know what it is, Bert. They will not stop talking about John Gruden. It's come up 1,000 times. John McClain. I mean, I love John McClain. I know you do too. He tweeted out yesterday the Titans should hire John Gruden, and the fans said, Gruden. Am I wrong for saying the Tennessee Titans are not hiring a coach who is suing the league in court, which takes Gruden and Brian Flores off the list?
Yeah, I would say it's unlikely. I think it would take a certain type of owner to do it. And I don't think Amy's that type of owner. It would take a certain type of owner who's going to thumb his nose at the league and be like, you know what, I don't care what you think, like a Steve Bisciotti. You know what I mean? Like it would take somebody like that to do it. And I'd also be remiss if you didn't mention that there's somebody from high up in the league office in Adolfo Birch who's working for the Titans now. So there are league office connections there. I have a hard time seeing the Titans being the one that's going to stick its neck, that they're going to stick their necks out and make that hire. I think John Gruden can be a good head coach for somebody, but just based on what I know about the organization, like that might be something like the Saints would do. You know what I mean? Like, but I just don't see the Titans doing something like that.
And finally, last one for you. I am going on your station in Boston, I think on Thursday.
Oh, awesome.
I think the Titans are going to win.
Star. You're a star up here, by the way. I hope you know that. Like your Super Bowl appearance was electric.
I believe.
I don't know how much Mike liked it though.
We ran that we ran that on the stream. I was just like, screw it. Just run their stream and just put it on there. I think the Titans are going to win on Sunday. And I have coined this term probably 6 years ago. I called it the Vrabel special, which is Vrabel will win a game that nobody thinks he's going to win on prime time against a good quarterback. And then the next week, he'll go out there and get his ass kicked. And I've seen it too many times. I saw them in a year where they beat up on Mahomes and Josh Allen and Stafford, lose to Tyrod Taylor, Zach Wilson, and Mac Jones. And so between the Titans firing the coach and getting the interim coach bump, and I think Mike McCoy will be more structured than Callahan, plus the fact that I feel like Vrabel's taking a victory lap up there and is enjoying himself too much, I think the Titans are going to win the game on Sunday.
That'd be interesting. I can tell you, like that would turn around a lot of the runaway train of optimism that's rolling down the tracks here. I guess I wouldn't be totally stunned just because I do think. So I think looking at Mike McCoy's history is interesting, right? And that he's worked with different types of quarterbacks. He worked with Jake Delhomme all those years ago in Carolina, who was kind of an improviser. He worked with pure pocket guys and Peyton Manning and Phillip Rivers. And then he worked with the true option quarterback, Tim Tebow. I think because of that experience, they're going to be doing some more creative things with Cam. I also think like you're going to see Cam get a little bit more of a green light to go make plays. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's what's interesting about what's happened with the Patriots up here with Drake is like that. That first week, it looked like he was chained to the pocket and the wheels are turning in his head. And, I think, Josh and Vrabel kind of made the conscious decision. We got to let him go and be himself a little bit more. And you've seen the results since. I think that sort of thing could happen in Tennessee now with Cam, and I'm not saying he's all of a sudden going to become a superstar. But if you watch him play, I mean, don't you get that sense, Jared, watching him, that there's a little bit too much thinking going on, a little bit too much it's just like conventional quarterback play when that's not what he is at this point, I
think Cam stinks.
Huh? Oh, you're already out on him.
Well, I'm not out on him. I think that when they drafted him, we talked about this at Super Bowl, and you were like, hey, the people I've talked to say that the quarterbacks in this class are not very good. It's more like 2022 than it is like the other years.
Yeah.
And I watched Cam's tape and I'm like, I see talent. Like I see a fluid athlete. He's got that Mahomes backyard football element to him, but he's not very accurate. He's got terrible footwork. He relies on his arm too much. And this is the Titans he's going to. This isn't, the quarterback factory here. This isn't Sean Payton. This is the Titans. And I just feel like the Titans are going to screw it up at coach. They're doing what I call the Jet playbook because they've got a general manager from Kansas City and a president from Green Bay, and they sit those quarterbacks in Kansas City and they sit them in Green Bay, and the Jets draft a quarterback and they say, Sam Darnold is our savior. And then they fire the coach. So Todd Bowles stinks. He goes. Adam Gase is going to save him. And then after that, it's, well, he sucks too. So now Sam Darnold sucks. He's out. So now Zach Wilson's going to be the savior. And that's what all the stupid teams do. That's what the Jets do. That's what the Browns do. That's what the Giants do. I mean, Browns got rid of Baker Mayfield because the owner went on impulse buy with Deshaun Watson, and they have the best defense in the league and a great coach, and it doesn't matter because the owner's so stupid. That's what they are doing here with Cam. So it's not that I think Cam is going to be a bust because of Cam. I think Cam's going to be a bust because he went to this terrible organization.
So that's what's going to happen next year is Davis Webb's going to take the Titans job, and then he's going to bring Zach Wilson, who he worked with in Denver, with him. And Zach Wilson's going to beat out Cam Ward for the starting job. And then Cam Ward is going to go somewhere else and win wherever else it is. Right. I like it's almost jarring at this point how many reclamation stories we're seeing. You know what I mean? Like how you've got Baker Mayfield, you got Sam Darnold, Geno Smith was able to pull his career out of a dumpster the last, over the last 4 or 5 years. And now you're seeing it with Daniel Jones in Indianapolis. Like I think you're right. Like in that, like not enough credence is given to the environment that these guys are in and how important that is. And so I think that's the number one thing now. Like you look at like where the Titans are, it's like, how do we not screw this kid up? Cause what is this? Like it was 4 in a row, right? Like where, the number 1 overall pick quarterback had his coach fired in season. And, Trevor, I think, has still felt the effects from that in Jacksonville. He was considered generational. And then, you see, what it's meant for Bryce Young and Caleb Williams, how it's kind of how it stunted their growth. Whether or not they come out of it, we'll see. But, I think, Cam certainly, I think to some degree, you got to give him a little patience now because the circumstances definitely haven't been ideal.
Bert, great stuff, buddy. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to hop on with us.
All right. Thanks, Jared.
Yep. Albert Breer from the Monday Morning Quarterback, the